My name is Dan Levine. I'm a senior data analyst and data products manager. I work in the policy bureau of the office of New York City Comptroller Brad Lander. I am excited to help kind of start this Open Data Week with a presentation of two new data dashboards that we've built in the last year using open data sources, products to give New Yorkers more transparency into how well the city is doing, delivering services for residents, and to call attention to some important issues. So today I'm going to first give a quick tour of these two dashboard products. The first is called Measuring New York City Government Performance, which, as described, tracks how well the city government is doing, delivering services to New Yorkers across an array of measures. The second of these tools is called Charting Homelessness, which is a more detailed look into the population of New Yorkers who are experiencing homelessness and the patterns of eviction that are pushing people out of stable housing. After showing these two products, I'm going to step back a little bit and talk about the why and how of how we developed these tools, what the stories we were looking to tell, and then how we went through the process of giving context to the data to present these as dashboards that can tell stories about what's going on. Now, last step of this, I'm going to peek behind the curtain, talk a little bit about the technical tooling that we use to build these two products. And then the lesson for today at the end is just a little instruction on how to access open data in an automated way to start building tools like this yourself. Okay, so let's start with a demo. I've got links here to these two products. You can also just Google something like Comptroller Charting Homelessness or Comptroller Measuring New York City Government Performance and find these there, but I'll put them up on the screen. The first of these tools is, as I said, Measuring New York City Government Performance. This dashboard gives a high-level overview of how city agencies are performing. And that means how they're doing delivering vital services to city residents, as well as some bigger measures of residents and the city overall's health, safety, economic strength, and quality of life. The idea with the view on this dashboard is to combine many different types of measures into a really simple interface. For everything we're tracking, we just show whether it's getting better or whether it's getting worse over a number of different time frames. The way to start with this is we can start by picking an agency to focus on, or we could also pick to look at just indicators that are improving or worsening. But to give you a taste, I'll start here with the Department of Buildings. I'll look at the building landscape in New York. You can see here we track a number of indicators for how well the Department of Buildings is doing. We track these, as I mentioned, over 4 different timescales. Short term is the most recent month versus just the month prior. So looking at the most recent month of data we have for these, that's just this February versus January. The midterm measure looks at the previous quarter versus the same quarter in the year before. The full year measure gives a full 12 months of data versus the 12 months prior. And then the long-term measure gives the current year to date versus the same time frame in 2019, and that's to give a pre-pandemic baseline. And then if we take a look at what these indicators show, now I'm looking at this full year versus a year prior. We can see on one of these indicators, let's look at the median days to issue a permit. We see that this is good news, and that's why this card is highlighted in green, that the median days to issue a permit fell from 30 days to 22 days. We can see those data values down here. And that's a 27% improvement from last year to this year. Each of these cards has a summary of what's described, and then if you hover over this read more, it'll give you some detail of what this indicator is showing. You can also click on the source link, which will take you back to the source data. I'll talk about this, but most of these are hosted on open data or other open sources. We can look next to this. Another indicator is the net number of new homes permitted in New York City. This indicator is also down for the year, but in that case, this is bad news, and that's why this card is in red. The design trick here is some of these things, it's good news if the number goes up, and some of these, it's bad news if the number goes up. And so we show both the direction that the indicator has actually gone, and then the color coding is to give a sign of what's good and what's bad. I'll just show you one other agency here just to get a peek at how this works, but I hope you can dig into this on your own. Let's look at DOT over the past year. So we can see some good news here is that the time to repair traffic signals is improving. The time to repair potholes is slightly improving. Both of these, not enough to indicate that they're great news. So we put these into the neutral category. We see bad news on the miles of bus lanes installed. This is where DOT has been falling short of their goal for bus lane miles installed, but improving on the number of crashes on New York City streets. The comparison here is also useful just to show that on this dashboard, we show both things that are direct measures of an agency's throughput. So things like the miles of bus lanes installed or the time to issue a building permit. And we also show things that are a little bit broader outcome measures. He's not directly in control of the crashes on New York City streets, but of course, it's part of their responsibility to ensure our streets are safe. And so we use crashes as a measure there. I do hope that you can dig into this on your own. I saw a couple questions pop up. Let me just take a look at these. Yeah, I will talk about how this is built and would love to talk more about the accessibility of this. We don't have a particular color blindness setting, and we did try to use accessible design for this. We can talk about that. And then the thresholds here, we did generally set thresholds where a 5% change up or down, we'd shade as good news or bad news. That seems like that was a threshold that we set ourselves as something that seemed notable. And less than that threshold, we still show the change. You can see this 4% change in crashes with injuries. Don't shade that as good news or bad news. Let's jump over then to the second of these two dashboards. So I want to just give you a quick tour through. I'm not going to go completely in detail through this because there's a lot of information here. This dashboard gives a detailed snapshot into the population living in city homeless shelters and city actions to help residents avoid homelessness and to move back into stable housing. This tool really complements some other products and data that we've put out on particularly the population of asylum seekers and new arrivals to New York City. Here we're looking more at the population of New Yorkers who've lost housing in New York City and face homelessness because of that. Let's give a quick tour. This starts with an overview. The first thing to look at here is just the total homeless population of New York City. Actually, for this chart, we are including both new arrivals as well as folks who are not new arrivals to the city, both in some special shelter systems that were set up for new arrivals, as well as the Department of Homeless Service shelter system. You can see each of these populations here. The key thing to note, I think, on the overall trend in the homeless population in New York City, there's been, I think, a well-reported increase in new arrivals to New York City, especially peaking last year. Many of those arriving and entering these either Department of Homeless Service shelters or a special shelter system. But net of that population, that's the bars at the bottom of this chart, there's a steadily increasing population of New Yorkers who are losing their home and winding up in DHS shelters. That population has been really increasing since it hit a low during the pandemic when there were a number of special housing policies that helped reduce that population. So we really set up this dashboard to look at why that is. What is driving this increase in the population of New Yorkers facing homelessness? We looked at this from two sides. Why are people losing stable housing and falling into homelessness? And then what is the city doing to move people out of shelter and back into stable housing? The next two charts on this overview page go into that. So why are people losing stable housing? What we looked at here, a main contributing factor is evictions. After evictions were largely paused during, as I said, some special policies during the depths of the pandemic, we saw the number of evictions quickly rise, climb back up through 2022 and reach this plateau. That number has been slightly decreasing over the past year, but we still see over 8,000 families a month facing eviction in New York City. That plus the increasing unavailability of affordable or low-cost housing is pushing more families into homelessness. Then on the other side of this, what is the city doing? How well is the city doing of moving people out of shelter and back into stable housing? The tools that the city has to do that mostly are through housing voucher programs to help residents pay their rent within stable housing. Here we do see, again, a sort of a good news pattern over the last few years that the number of people moved out of shelter into stable housing each month has been increasing year over year. But this is still just 3,000 individuals or so a month, which is not quite meeting the scale of the population in homeless shelters. The rest of this dashboard really details these three issues. Who is in homeless shelters? What is the pattern of evictions that's pushing people into shelter? And how is the city helping residents avoid eviction? And then how is the city working to move people out of shelter? This next tab here will look at the population in shelter. These data come directly from the Department of Homeless Services. They're published on New York City Open Data, and it gives us a look into the aggregate demographics of who's in the Department of Homeless Service shelter system. We can look at that by family type, single adults, adult families, and families with children. We can look at this by age of the residents in shelter, or we can look by race or ethnicity. This will be race and ethnicity categories. The City Department of Homeless Services records the race or ethnicity of the head of household for each family in shelter. So these are the categories that are reported by that agency for the individual who is identified as the head of household. Here we can look at the racial and demographic pattern over the past few years, and then look at this also by different types of families. If we just look at the families with children in shelter, we see a big increase in the number of families with children whose head of household is identified as Hispanic over the last few years. If we look instead at single adults, we can see a steadily increasing population of individuals who identify as Black in that population of single adults, and something of an increase and then decline in the number of Hispanic single adults. So I hope there's more to dig in here for folks interested in digging into or looking at exploring, investigating the aggregate population in the shelter system. The next piece of this I want to look at is the eviction side of the story. We know that one of the contributing factors to families losing stable housing, ending up in the city homeless shelter system instead, is facing eviction. We have here two measures of eviction. This first is these are every single eviction filing by landlords against tenants, either for non-payment of rent or for holdover in an apartment after the expiration of a lease. But those could include instances when the landlord doesn't offer the tenants a lease renewal. I do want to particularly thank the Housing Data Coalition for providing these data. These are not published on New York City Open Data. They come originally from the State Office of Court Administration, but the team at the Housing Data Coalition has arranged for an agreement to publish these data and then built a whole data processing pipeline to get these data from OCA and make them publicly available. So we're using those data. And here, breaking these down by borough, which I think is a little bit interesting because we see in the slight decline in evictions over the past year, seems like that's especially driven by these evictions just in Brooklyn, which have particularly declined in the last few months. So I'm not sure why that is. If anyone knows more about these borough by borough patterns of evictions, I'd be interested to learn more. But partly we provided this detail in the data to be able to keep going back and seeing how this is changing. The second of these charts, this is really a subset of evictions where a tenant loses a case in court and then is actually forcibly removed from their home by a city marshal. In this pattern of evictions, we see the obvious pause in evictions during the eviction moratorium for part of the pandemic. And then this number of evictions just rides right back up at the end of that moratorium. We have very detailed data on where exactly each one of these marshal executed evictions takes place. And so we're able to put that on a map and see that overall over the past 8 years, those have been most concentrated in these central Brooklyn neighborhoods. But for example, if we just look at the evictions over the past few months, past year, those evictions have been more concentrated in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan. So more to explore here, more detail on these eviction filings, again, using some more great data prepared by the Housing Data Coalition that we published here. I want to just highlight the last piece of this eviction story. What is the city doing to help tenants stay in their homes or help prevent evictions? Because families who are able to remain in their homes have stable housing and don't wind up in city shelters. A key thing is helping tenants have legal representation in housing court. Tenants who have a lawyer can do much better at fighting off unfair eviction filings against them. The city has what's commonly called a right to counsel, which is a program to provide legal counsel for certain low-income and seniors facing eviction in housing court. However, we see that the actual rate of representation in housing court is, after reaching a peak back in 2021, almost 3/4 of tenants in housing court actually having a lawyer represent them, that quickly fell back down. And over the past few years, this has been just in the 30 to 40% range. That's the portion of tenants who have legal representation in housing court. The other sort of key set of programs that the city has to help tenants stay in their homes is a whole suite of financial programs wrapped up in what's called Home Base. That's the brand name for a set of programs where tenants facing especially temporary financial distress or facing eviction can come get access to things like a one-shot deal that can bridge a temporary financial hardship and help tenants pay off back rent and stay in their homes. Here, we're just charting the number of families each month who are helped by these home-based programs. We see this kind of jumping around a little bit month to month, but overall, the level is flat over the past several years, which doesn't, again, meet the scale of the need. One last piece of this to show is just the other side of this. How well is the city doing helping people move out of shelter and back into stable housing? I showed the summary of that on the first page, and then here we just have those same data, but broken down by the particular city programs that the city has to provide vouchers or provide other stable housing for tenants leaving shelter. Here you see the city FEPS program, which city actually set up to consolidate a number of these voucher programs, has really grown to include most of the vouchers that are provided. That number has steadily increased over the past several years, and that's a good sign. I think a key point here is that still this voucher program and the whole set of subsidies and other programs to help residents move out of shelter and into stable housing has not been meeting the scale of the need of the population in homeless shelters. So I'm going to move off of this dashboard now. The idea is that this is a tool for folks exploring these issues around homelessness, the population in homeless shelters, and the policies that contribute to that, to be able to explore the most up-to-date data coming out of New York City Open Data and other sources. So I hope you have a chance to explore these more if this is something that's interesting to you. But for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to take a step back and talk about really why and how we develop these products and how we work to give some context and some narrative to the data that we're presenting. We're here at the beginning of New York City Open Data Week. We love open data. I love open data. The data that's available on the New York City Open Data portal is an amazing resource for doing really detailed research and figuring out exactly what's going on within city government. I have here on the screen an example of, I think, one of the most interesting detailed data sets on open data. This is every single pothole that's repaired by DOT. It's like individual work orders. Every month they publish a list of every single pothole that's repaired. So this is something we could go dig into and answer all sorts of questions about potholes. But if any one of you looks at this little data set here and tries to tell me, like, is this good? Is it bad? Is DOT doing a good job? It's hard to tell from just this data. And the point is, data is not going to tell its own story. It's up to us to give some context to it and show what we are trying to show from the data. Our office, the policy bureau within the office of the New York City Comptroller, what we do is track how well the city is doing. We identify inequities or areas for improvement and specifically city policies that can drive better results. A lot of the time to do that, we write reports. And so we pull a detailed data set like this. We'd spend a lot of time looking through it, getting the context, and then writing about what's going on at that moment in time and making recommendations. What we wanted to do with these two dashboards that I've showed is something different and to give an ongoing, up-to-the-minute live view of how things are going right now, how things are changing over time, so that we could keep coming back to look at this, and so that members of the public interested in these issues could keep coming back to these issues and understand what do things look like right now. How do we go about thinking about these dashboards and then starting to build them? The first step was just figuring out what is the story that we want to tell? What's the important story here to show? I think for any of you thinking about how to build similar products or how to build data tools that tell stories, start with thinking about what is the story you want to focus on. With homelessness, we knew homelessness was an important and growing issue in the city. We wanted to provide more data about this. There'd been a lot written and a lot of data about new arrivals and asylum seekers, but there was really a gap in talking about this population of New Yorkers who were losing their home and ending up homeless. So we wanted to fill in particularly that gap in the story. With the agency management dashboard, there are a lot of threads about how different parts of city government are doing, partly from the other work that we do and other oversight agencies do and other nonprofit groups put out work on how things are going. The point here was to put all these measures in one place and really make these comparable, to be able to look at different measures along the same scale. Once we had in mind what's the story we want to tell, the next step was to find the data. Where do we go to start looking for data about New York City? It's probably the same place all of you do. It's why we're here. We start with the New York City Open Data portal, just looking what data sets are published by agency or by category. We use New York City data first for a lot of reasons. First, we wanted to set these up in ways that could be completely automated. And so we needed to use data that was already publicly available online. We didn't want to go through the process of requesting data from agencies and then having to manually go through that. We wanted to use public data so that we could like let anyone who's interested in learning more about this go check our work or go check the data and explore it further. When looking for what kind of data sources we could use, we had a lot of criteria. We wanted data that was available, that was sort of obvious. We wanted data that would be frequently updated. The point of these dashboard-like products is to show what's going on right now. And so for that, we need data that's frequently updated. We wanted data that would add essential context for something as large and complex as what's going on with the city's homelessness population. We were particularly looking for data that we could plug into that story of why are people losing stable housing and how quickly are people moving out of shelter. And then we wanted data that we could give a clear direction to. I think this is something that's especially important for something like a dashboard where we just don't have a lot of visual real estate or text to explain what's going on. In a report, we have more room to explain the nuance and say, this is a little bit good, but also for some other reasons, it's not quite so good. On a dashboard where the point was just a visual, we needed indicators. We needed data where we could build an indicator and say up is good or up is bad. What were some of the challenges in finding data to actually meet this? So what's available? We started, as I said, with what's on New York City Open Data, and then we moved on to what's publicly available. There are some city agencies that publish great data, but not on open data. So NYPD crime data is just available on their website. You can download this Excel sheet and get detailed data that way every week, which is great. It's not an open data, which is a little bit of a pain. So we had to just develop a different way to get at these data. I don't want to just pick on PD here because Department of Education also publishes their student test scores away on these like Excel files that you have to scroll halfway down a report page and then download an Excel file to get the scores. So open data is the best. It's great. A lot of agencies publish data elsewhere, which we also wanted to use. And then, of course, I'll thank again the Housing Data Coalition for taking data from a state source and making it available. We were looking, as I said, for data that would be frequently updated. To do that, we were looking at how frequently data were historically updated and how frequently they said they'd be updated. We have run into some challenges with that in that data just sometimes gets stale. A main data source for our charting homelessness dashboard, the population of who's in homeless shelters, this data is published by the Department of Homeless Services. It was last updated last October. And so we don't right now have a particularly up-to-date view of who that population in homeless shelters now are. And then, as I said, a key piece of this was just picking indicators where we could say down is good or up is good. Once we had all the data that we could work with, and part of that was the disappointment of realizing there was data that we really wanted for a story that just didn't exist. But once we had the data we had, it was about putting it in context. For example, with the charting homelessness dashboard, this was really about looking at overall, what's the population in homeless shelters? What's the population who's homeless in New York City? And then contextualizing that with what's the pattern of families facing eviction and what's the pattern of families moving out of homeless shelters and into stable housing. The idea is by putting these things together, we can tell a complete story and focus particularly on areas where city policies and city actions could be doing more to reduce this challenge of homelessness. I'm going to move now into a little bit of the technical details of how we actually built these tools. Our design requirements really for these data dashboards, we needed a system that could be completely automated. So we needed to be able to set up the data queries once and then build some system that was able to go fetch new data, update the visuals, and publish those onto our website on its own. We needed to build a system that actually just we had the technical skills to build in-house. We couldn't go bring in others to build this for us. That largely meant me, along with our communications and IT teams, to build. We needed something that we could actually publish on the website as we have our website set up and that would meet our accessibility standards. The main tool we used firstly for charting homelessness was Power BI. That's the brains of this whole thing. Power BI was my first time really using it for this big tool. It seemed would be a great tool to use because it has this point and click interface and because it really handles all the data automation on its own pretty well. We set up a whole bunch of queries with data into Power BI from open data and from other data sources. This is now hosted on Power BI servers, and 4 times a week, it goes and fetches new data, updates the visuals with that fresh data. And then the visuals that they're created and hosted within Power BI are just embedded on our website. So we have little sort of iframe boxes on our website that just are windows through to these hosted Power BI visuals. Some of this worked really well. Power BI, once you get things set up, is really nice for wiring up connections between different data and setting up those cross filters and cross selections between data. The actual ability to customize the display within our own website turned out to be a real shortcoming. I guess I'm here to say if you have a Power BI license and you use it, go for it. And there are definitely great ways to hook it up with New York City open data sources. I missed actually, but there was a great presentation. I hope a great presentation from someone from OTI just an hour before this on setting up those Power Query connections from open data into Power BI or Excel. Do that if that's something you're interested in. But because of some of the limitations, especially the limitations around the visuals, we wound up for the second of these two that we built, which was the agency management dashboard. We built a custom backend that's running on our own servers here. I think it's actually running on machines in the controller's office. Our IT department set up a server environment that could run the data automation. I wrote just a ton of little custom Python scripts, which would go check if there was new data available, either at open data or at whatever the source was, load the newest data, summarize it, then push it into Google Sheets where we store the backend summary data for all of these. So my great colleagues on the communications and IT team built a custom front end that lives on our website that is constantly pulling in the new data from those Google Sheets summaries, using those data to update the actual cards that are displayed on the website. So always showing the numbers and the colors of the newest data available. I'm happy to take more detailed questions about the technical parts of this at the end. But I wanted to leave just one little hands-on how-to piece for you, because this was the one piece that I figured out that unlocked being able to automate the data through either of these tools, either through Power BI or through these custom Python scripts I wrote. But also you can use this to connect through any interface to open data. To start with how to query data on open data, go to open data, find the data set you want to look at. You can scroll through it and browse, but the cool thing here is to click on the query button here, actions and query data. That will pop up this whole frame that lets you build and then run a pretty complex query against the data. So if we have 3-on-1 data and we want to look at how many 3-on-1 calls were there just to sanitation, how many by type, by month, we can build this whole query within this interface here. We can then, if you go to the export link, it'll give you what's called an API endpoint. This just means a URL that a computer can talk to and can get back the data it wants. Copy this whole deal. Okay, it looks like a mess. It's a big long URL, which you then have to also go and get your own app token, create an open data account, log in, go into developer settings, create an app token, add your app token to the end of this already long URL. What does this get you though? If you plug this URL in, you get back just the summary data that you want. So this is, again, this is querying right from the complete 301 data set, but because we've run a query against it, we don't get back the full data. We just get the month, the complaint type, and the count, which is what we asked for there. That's great, but let's take another look again at this. What I said was just a big, messy, long URL, and it is. But if we decode this, if we turn all the %20s into spaces and make this look like actual text, you'll see this is just a big SQL query in the middle of your URL. If this is the first time you've ever heard SQL, this lesson might not be the most useful for you, but for folks who are used to querying data, SQL is just a language for writing data queries. It works across a whole bunch of platforms. It works here. This is a pretty straightforward SQL query. The point here is you can write almost any kind of SQL you want that fits within the Socrata flavor of SQL language. You can drop it here right into the middle of this URL after, the direction to the particular table that you want and including your app token at the end. One catch here is that by default, this will only give you 1,000 rows back. So you probably also want to add a big limit number at the end. This will up the number of rows it gives you from 1,000 to whatever this is, 100 million. This whole URL will now give you the query data you want back. And this URL you can drop into anything. So the queries I have running to open data into Power BI, they're just these types of URLs. That's the source. You can put this together into some sort of code pipeline. This is basically what my Python pipeline looks like to just build the whole query from this base URL. This is the particular table that we want, and then we can pass a query into it. But a URL looks like this. You can put it into R, you can put it into JavaScript, you can run it directly into Excel. Anywhere that you need to load live data from New York City Open Data, you can include this query and get exactly the thing that you want. We have 10 minutes, and I do want to leave time for questions, which is okay because we are done with my spiel, and I saw a bunch of questions come up, and
I think the next question is Raquel's question about what your hopes are and how this data will be used.
thanks for the question. I'd say I guess the two products have slightly different audiences and purposes, but the goals are that people who are interested in understanding how well is the city doing will have this as a resource for whatever particular part of that story they want an answer to. On the management dashboard, if you are looking at buildings or looking at transportation or looking at corrections or crime, that you have one place to go and see a few key indicators of how are things going, how are they going right now, how are they going over the past year, the past 5 years. I think that's even more true for the Charting Homeless dashboard, to look at this particularly complex issue, but be able to see some of the different threads that are all contributing to this challenge of more New Yorkers facing homelessness. That there's a place to go to understand who the population are who are experiencing homelessness, and then look at some of those contributing factors. Scott, question about, are the data geocoded? Is there anything geographic? I guess the only geographic part of this, I guess, is the Marshall executed evictions. We didn't have to geocode those from the source, which is on Open Data. Those have the exact location. And then we were just aggregating those into the heat map that we show. Thank you. Yeah, there's some gnarly data out there, not on Open Data, in some giant databases that we have to access. Some of this I actually had to access some of the databases that our office publishes. It's not on Open Data. There's a lot of tricky stuff I had to build into these custom scripts to be able to find those data sources, load them, summarize them, the ones that were not on Open Data. Thanks for a great discussion here about stacked bar charts. I like using stacked bar charts to show the total population within each group or within each year, broken down by category. That's what that chart was showing. At what stage did we know that we needed a custom solution for our data display? Yeah, that's a good question. To walk through a little bit of the scoping process that I did to manage each of these projects. The first thing we developed was the Charting Homeless dashboard. We knew that we had some rich data there. We wanted to be able to show things over time across space where we had those geographic data and across different categories. We knew we were going to want to be able to use some sort of more complex visuals and be able to do the cross filtering between different visuals. The wish list there was for some sort of a tool that would support that kind of cross-filtering and interactivity. For that, we don't have the capacity to build that from scratch in-house, and so look to use Power BI as a tool where we could build those within Power BI and then have a view of them within our website. Through that process, though, we also ran into the limitations of how well we could actually customize the visuals within Power BI. We could do a lot with the presets. The visuals that we had in mind for the management dashboard were something much simpler, using colors and using just some big numbers to really point to what's going on, and wanted to be able to better embed that within our website, which would have better support for mobile views and better support for the translation services that we have on our website. So we were looking for a way that we could build that as part of our own website instead of something hosted elsewhere. And then I worked with our communications and web developer team to make that happen for our website. Can you use the same JSON and app token string in Power BI? Yes, absolutely. You can start in Power BI, or it's the same like Power Query thing to pipe something into Excel. If you just start with a naked URL and just paste in this whole thing that I have here, basically, this whole thing is a URL, it will just load, like it will read that JSON and turn it into a table for you. Largely the same with any other sort of interface where you would be able to read in data, like to read into a pandas data frame in Python or to read into R or to some other environment. Ooh, I love these questions about what kind of data visualizations to use. 3-on-1 data is record level data. So each one of these is just like a single call. By using the group by clause here, we're using thistle clause. Okay, I will give the very short SQL lesson, but we're grouping by the month and by complaint type and then counting the number of complaints for each month and that complaint type. This is another place where probably I could use something like a stack bar chart showing each month along the x-axis, and the y-axis would be the total number of complaints. We could shade those by the different complaint types. Probably don't have time in the next 2 minutes to throw it together for you, but that's what that would look like. And elaborate on the process for developing the Python scripts and data ingestion. This is, again, probably more than I can fully explain, but I wound up building most of this framework from scratch. Each of the data sources has its own runner script. So I built some standard tools that just use these sorts of URLs to pull the data in, and then some tools to take a time series of data and turn it into kind of the standard measures that we use, so that for each time series, we could show like month over month, quarter versus quarter last year over year to date versus 2019 to extract those time frames and then show like, is it good? Is it bad? Is it up more than 5% or less than 5% or down more than 5%? So those are some base tools, and built a separate script for each of these data sources. The ones coming out of Open Data were pretty simple. I just ran a query and then ran the summary over it. The ones where we had to find a link on a page and then download the Excel file and then open the Excel file and find the data, those are a little bit more complicated, but that was actually why it was useful to have this be a fully custom Python framework, is I could just, for each one of the data sources, figure out like the best way to piece together tools to fish out the data that I needed. If folks have more questions about that specifically, email me and I will be happy to give some detail on how we actually did that. Because I know we are at time now. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question yet, but do please shoot me an email if you have more questions after.